Former President Barack Obama has endorsed Joe Biden for president. The 44th president remains the most influential figure in the Democratic Party. He announced his support for his former vice president in a 12-minute-long video Tuesday. Mr. Obama said, quote, "Joe has all the qualities we need in a president right now."
The kind of leadership that's guided by knowledge and experience, honesty and humility, empathy and grace. That kind of leadership doesn't just belong in our state capitals and mayor's offices. It belongs in the White House. And that's why I'm so proud to endorse Joe Biden for President of the United States.
For more on this, let's bring in CBSN political contributor Sean Sullivan. He is a national politics reporter for The Washington Post. Sean, really good to see you. Thanks so much for being with us. How much of a boost could former President Obama's endorsement give to Joe Biden's campaign?
Could be a really, really significant boost, Elaine. There's arguably no Democrat in the country right now that is as popular as Barack Obama. He's somebody that can draw thousands, if not tens of thousands of people to rallies if and when we get to a point where we are seeing political rallies again. He's somebody that has deep ties to donors and he can help Joe Biden raise money. And he's somebody who has a huge following on social media. Every time President Obama tweets or posts something on social media, a lot of people notice, a lot of people like him, a lot of Democrats like him. So this is a really big moment for Joe Biden. Now, it's not a surprise moment. A lot of people expected that this would eventually happen. A lot of people expected that Obama would support whoever the nominee is. But given that he has a close relationship with Joe Biden, they're friends, they stay in touch. Biden was, of course, Obama's vice president for 8 years. It made the expectation even greater that he would do this. But to have this happen now, this week, at a pretty uncertain time for the future of the Biden campaign, it's a big moment for Joe Biden and one that I think a lot of people in his campaign had hoped would come for a long time.
And Sean, we expected this endorsement would come, but is there a strategy behind the timing of this week's announcement?
Well, when you look at when this endorsement is coming, it's barely 24 hours or even perhaps slightly less than that after Bernie Sanders, who was the last remaining rival against Joe Biden, decided to endorse Biden. I've talked to Democrats about this today to get their sense of the succession. And what I've heard is, look, this is a signal that the Biden campaign is sending about how unified it wants to be going into November. You have yesterday Bernie Sanders, somebody who has a strong liberal following, has a lot of supporters that are young, that are not natural fans of Joe Biden. And then the next day you have Barack Obama, somebody who has wide support in the Democratic Party and has really, really strong support among African-American voters. So the signal I think that the Biden campaign is trying to send here is that this is a campaign that appeals to a broad cross-section of Democrats. The challenge, though, is that there are still a lot of Democrats, and I've talked to many of them who are activists and others, who are still skeptical of the Biden campaign, don't necessarily have the full confidence in him, don't agree with him on a lot of policies. But I think the Biden campaign sees this as the beginning of a process that they hope in November will heal the party and bring the party together against President Trump at the ballot box.
So to follow up, Sean, with respect to the Senator Sanders endorsement in particular, are Democrats feeling more optimistic about party unity?
I think they are feeling more optimistic. There are still, to be clear, a lot of Democrats who are not ready to endorse Biden, who are not ready to jump on board. But the one theme that comes through in a lot of the conversations I've been having with elected officials, with activists, and with everyday voters is that this looks a lot different than 2016. In 2016, there were a lot of divisions in the party between supporters of Sanders and supporters of Hillary Clinton. Many of those divisions never really healed. And I think a lot of Democrats feel that part of the reason that they lost in November of 2016 was because they were not able to heal those divisions. And so a lot of Democrats say it's like night and day difference this time. If you look at 2016, there were several weeks that passed between the time Bernie Sanders ended his campaign and the time he actually endorsed Hillary Clinton. Sanders ended his campaign this time around last week, and less than a week later, 5 days, in fact, he endorsed Joe Biden. They joined each other on a joint video event that they held online. So I think Democrats are cautiously optimistic, but they certainly feel that things are a lot better and a lot smoother than they were in 2016 between Clinton and Sanders at the end of that primary.
Well, at the same time, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the freshman congresswoman from Queens, New York, who has been campaigning for Bernie Sanders, believes that Joe Biden is struggling with millennials and people of color. Let's listen to what she said.
If you're struggling with young voters and Latino voters, how are we going to make sure that Medicare is at least open to folks in 18 to 25, 30, 40? What is going to be the plan for millennials? And dropping Medicare to 60 is not going to help millennials. It's not going to help this electorate that Biden is struggling with.
So, Sean, how big of a challenge does Joe Biden face in connecting with these voters and responding to the issues that matter to them?
Well, it looks like he may have to make some more policy concessions, some more personnel concessions if he's going to win over a bigger group of younger voters, of millennials, of liberal activists. You know, he has so far made some moves toward them, and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez alluded to one, which is a shift on healthcare. But a lot of activists say it's a good start, but it's not enough, and they want to see him embrace the kind of policies that they've been talking about the last several months on the campaign trail. And healthcare really is still one of the biggest dividing lines of the party, because Joe Biden has long advocated a plan that would expand the Affordable Care Act, the law known as Obamacare, that would create a optional public insurance program. A lot of liberal activists, and indeed Senator Sanders himself, has said that is not enough. We need a Medicare for all program. And they've pointed to the current pandemic, the current coronavirus crisis, and they've said, look, if anything, this crisis tells us why we need this more urgently than ever, why everybody needs access to healthcare. So we're seeing this debate sort of happen in real time, and there's still a great many voters, and a lot of them are young, who don't think Joe Biden has moved far enough on these policies. And so if you're the Biden campaign, what kind of balance do you try to strike between some of the principles that he's advocated for the last few months and doing or saying things that could help him build bridges to younger voters, to liberal voters? It's a tough balancing act often to strike, and we'll see in the coming months whether he's able to do that, whether he's able to excite young voters to turn out for him. I think that's a worry that Democrats have. Are young voters going to turn out in November? Are they going to feel an urgency to support Joe Biden, who, as we've seen, at least so far in the primary, has not really resonated very strongly with young voters?
Right, and who knows what the landscape is going to look like here, given the fact that we are in the midst of this pandemic right now. November seems so very far away. But I wonder, Sean, what is President Trump's campaign saying about this now that you have Joe Biden emerging as the presumptive Democratic nominee?
Well, they're saying a couple of things. I mean, on the one hand, when they look at this alliance between Biden and Sanders, they're trying to use it to argue that Biden's not as much of a moderate or as a centrist as he presents himself. They said, look, you know, this campaign, this ticket that Biden's going to be on the top of is actually more influenced by Bernie Sanders than you think, which, of course, is the opposite view that some Sanders supporters hold. They believe Biden hasn't moved far enough. I think the campaign, the Trump campaign, wants to try to draw a contrast with Biden, and they want to turn attention in this race to Biden's record and make it a choice between President Trump and former Vice President Biden. I think there are some worry among Republicans that if this race ends up being a referendum on President Trump, and if it ends up being a referendum on Trump's handling of the pandemic, of the coronavirus crisis, that could be very dangerous political territory for the Republican Party to be in. So I think what they're trying to do is run a campaign that in some ways is similar to the campaign Obama ran against Mitt Romney in 2012 when he was running in re-election campaign then. And that is to draw attention to the challenger, draw attention to the opponent. But the question is, will voters see it as mainly a choice between Biden and Trump, or will they see this simply as a referendum on Trump? That's a big question that we don't know the answer to at this point yet.
All right, Sean Sullivan. Sean, thanks so much. Really good to see you. Take care.
Thanks, Elaine.